The music of Yes without Jon Anderson. Does it stand up to the Jon Anderson years? What do the fans think? What do the critics think? We're going to explore all of that next with author Preston Frazier on Booked on Rock. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. We have a returning guest to the podcast, author Preston Frazier. He has a brand new book out now titled Yes, Indeed, Tales from Yes Without Jon Anderson. Preston, welcome back to the podcast.
Eric, it's good to be here. Of course, I've been listening to Booked on Rock a lot. I especially like the episode you had recently about Rico Kasich. I was wondering if you guys would want to talk about the use of the drum machines. So planning their David Robinson for the last three albums, but you never got to that. So
I did notice that the sound of the drums changed drastically with the Mutt Lange album, Heartbeat City, and then Door to Door.
Yep.
And then the one from 2011, Move Like This.
I saw that tour, actually. That was fantastic. They were great with no bass player.
With no bass player. Yeah. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. And this one is an interesting one. Before we get into the book, you dedicate it to, quote, the 5% for something fans. Who is the 5% for something fan?
Yeah, that's a phrase which came from Mark Anthony Kay, who's in the book, and Kevin Mulrine, who chair the Yes Music podcast. And I think it's taken from the song 5% for Nothing from the Fragile album, a Bill Bruford track, where that song, even though it's instrumental, talks about really how managers get money for doing nothing. But Ardent Yes fans call themselves 5% for something because they love the band and they're a small minority who know the entire catalog.
The book focuses specifically on the years of Yes without their iconic frontman, Jon Anderson. I'm really curious as to what inspired you to focus on these specific eras.
Wow, man, that's a good question.
Are you a fan of The Underdog?
I I'm a fan of The Underdog, and I'm a fan of these albums. But Eric, quite frankly, there are a lot of great Yes albums, less Yes books. Tim Morris, who is a wonderful prog artist who I interviewed a while ago, has a wonderful book on Yes. I know you've interviewed some people who have written books on Yes.
Stephen Lamb.
Stephen Lamb, and
Yep.
also the guy who did the book on, was it Def Leppard? Oh God, I can't remember his name now. But there are a bunch of great books on Yes. Kevin Mulrine of Yes Music Podcast, and a book on Tales from Topographic Oceans recently, which is a wonderful book. So I didn't want to retread those. I also didn't want to talk about something that everyone talks about. We know you're going to talk about Fragile, Close to the Edge, 90215. So why should I do that? I want to do something totally different, which is what I think I did.
And I think it's going to bring out some interesting debate among Yes fans once this gets out there. The book just came out, right?
Right. It just came out. It's available right now, I think, on Amazon, but pretty soon it'll be in all major retailers, physical and digital.
Okay. Yeah. It will be interesting to see some of the comments that the longtime Yes fans make regarding this, because it's going to be an interesting debate as to how these years stand up to the Jon Anderson years. The opening chapter covers the 1980 album Drama. That's the first one. It's their 10th studio album, but the only to feature Trevor Horn on lead vocals, and the first with Jeff Downs on keyboards. A wonderfully written opening. I'm going to quote you here. You write, quote, "In the autumn of 1980, as dusk settled over London's foggy streets, the air carried a secret promise of change, a promise that the familiar might yet be reborn. For Yes, a band long defined by its intricate progressions and sprawling epics, that night was the quiet prelude to a transformation both unexpected and inevitable. The stage was set not in a grand arena, but in the collective determination of its members, a determination that, despite internal fractures and the loss of cherished icons like Jon Anderson and Rick Wakeman, the creative spirit of Yes would not only endure, but evolve." Wonderfully written. Wanted to quote you directly on that one. Before we get into the album, what led to the departure of Jon Anderson and keyboardist Rick Wakeman?
Right. I think it was because of I think it was 1979 or 1978, the Paris sessions that they did with Roy Thomas Baker, who died a few months ago. And they were working on an album in Paris. It was Anderson, Wakeman, Howe, Squire, and White. They had completed some rough tracks. And then I believe Alan White, their late drummer, went roller skating, disco skating, and broke his ankle. So they decided to wrap up the album, wrap up the sessions, but it was thought that Anderson and Wakeman really weren't feeling the music. They weren't enjoying the sessions. They were kind of burnt out and they wanted to do their own thing. So they both went in their way to do solo albums. And that led to a situation where Squire said, "Well, I want to continue. How do you want to continue? Why do you want to continue?" And they said, "Yeah." So they found the Buggles and integrated the Buggles, Jeff Downs, and Trevor Horn into the band.
And the Buggles, known for "Video Killed the Radio Star,"
Yes,
famously known
class-
for that
classic
song.
song and two really good albums by Jeff and Trevor. Yeah.
I've heard about that. I got to listen to them. I've heard that. Let's talk about the sole single from the album, which is "Into the Lens." Interesting comment. I'm hoping you can expand on. You write, quote, "It was as if the band, through this song, invited its listeners to look deeply into the reflective surfaces of memory and change, to witness the subtle alchemy of loss transforming into innovation." Now, this is referring to both the complexity and the power of the track.
Right. Into the Lens is a well, quite frankly, I love every song on Drama. It's one of my favorite Yes albums, if not my favorite. But Into the Lens is a great song because it combines so many great progressive elements, so many great pop elements, and it has such wonderful guitar nuance playing to the album, to the song. One thing I like about Drama is that how doesn't do what's expected, nor does, for that matter, Chris Squire. Nor did he ever do that. It is really subtle, but it's different. It is progressive. I talked to Jon Anderson a few years ago about his album with Ronna Stolt. I think it was called, what was it called? Like The Miracle of Life or something like that. It was a duet album. And I asked him what was progressive music. And I really appreciate the album he had done with Royna. And he said, well, progressive music means you're always progressing, you're always moving forward. And I think Into the Lens and Drama shows that, where it's a band that didn't want to recreate Fragile. They want to create Close to the Edge, but wanted to move forward. They really did.
What was the response to the album from the fans and the critics? And how did the perceptions kind of shift in the years following its release?
Yeah, I don't remember where it charted. It charted pretty well, though, in America and in England. But I think that a lot of fans weren't aware initially, back when it was released, that Anderson and Wake were no longer in the band. And a lot of people bought it and initially thought it was just okay, or it was not okay because it wasn't John and Rick Wakeman. I think over the years, it has definitely gained a following. And a lot of fans point to this as being one of their favorite Yes albums. And I think when they toured, maybe it was 5 years ago for the Topographic Drama Tour, with one part drama, the first part of the show, drama in its entirety, the second part, Tales from Topographic Oceans in its entirety. And those songs were really well received by the audience. And also, the Topographic Drama live release is a wonderful live release, probably one of the best live releases for a band that has a lot of live releases. So it has definitely gained favor among Yes fans, especially those who are open to new singers and new ideas, and even those who said there's no Yes without Jon Anderson. Some of them have fallen to the fold.
You mentioned not a lot of people knew that Jon Anderson was out of the band. And it may sound surprising if you're a younger listener right now, but in those days, you're talking pre-internet. So you'd only find out about that maybe in a trade magazine, maybe Rolling Stone would write about it. But if at that time, I don't know how popular Yes really was. The popularity is starting to wane a little bit in terms of mainstream, wasn't it? So they may not have gotten the coverage.
I think Tormato, which was the album before this, before the Paris sessions, did reasonably well. But again, like you're exactly right. There was no internet back then. You would find out about bands from Rolling Stone or Circus or wherever you were reading. And then this album did reasonably well in America. And the tour, when they took Trevor Horn and Jet Downs on the road, also did well in America, but in Europe, they were heckled. a lot. Where's John? Where's John? Where's Rick? So they did good business, but the feedback from the fans was a little bit negative when they toured this album initially. And that was probably part of the reason why Horn decided he didn't want to continue with Yes, and he wanted to go into production. And they went their separate ways.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Trevor Horn doesn't sing on another Yes album, but he's not out of Yes entirely. In fact, he's part of a huge commercial peak era of Yes before getting into the 2011 album Fly From Here. Talk about what happened with the band and Trevor Horn following drama.
Trevor Horn decided that he wanted to be a producer. He didn't like being on stage. He liked writing, and he still does that a lot, actually. And he's had some great success with writing with Seal and with some other artists. But he didn't want to be the focal point on stage. And Yes wanted a front man, even though Chris Squire could sing most of the parts. And there was some talk also later when we get to when you talk about 90215 about Trevor Rabin singing the parts, but Horn didn't want to do this. He went to production, and at that time, Yes was kind of fractured, and you had Jeff Downs and Steve Howe working together. Jeff Downs had a concept of a new band, and he took it to Steve Howe saying, "Hey, why don't we do a super group? You and me, Simon Phillips on drums, and we'll find a bass player." And that band eventually became Asia with, of course, Carl Palmer, Steve Howe, John Wetton, and Jeff Downs. And
Then there was a project Cinema, right?
and that was a little bit. It was cinema. It was about the same time where Chris Squire and Alan White, that partnership, which remained till really Chris Squire died, wanted to continue with some sort of music. So they reached out to Jimmy Page, who was looking for projects. And Page, of course, had Led Zeppelin was over and he wanted to do something. He wanted to write, he wanted to produce, he wanted to play live. So Horn, Downs, no, not Downs. So then Squire and White worked with Jimmy Page. They recorded, did some jams, worked on a few songs, and then then what happened was that Jimmy Page decided, hey, we need a singer. I know this guy. He's really good. He was in Led Zeppelin. Let's get Robert Plant in there. And Robert Plant said, there's no way. He just didn't want to do it. They wanted to try to recreate any of the Led Zeppelin stuff. Wasn't ready to go back into doing group work. So that kind of dissolved. And then Chris Squire said, well, I heard about this other singer and guitarist from South Africa named Trevor Rabin. They brought him in. He had a whole bunch of songs partially written, some completely written, and they decided to do a band called Cinema. And then decided, hey, we need a keyboard player. What about we go back and ask this guy who was the original keyboard player of Yes, Tony Kaye, to join us? And he did for a little bit. Then he quit, then he came back.
That is a spot on. Great job right there, Preston, because that is so complicated.
It's so
when you go back to that
isn't it?
period, it's like trying to draw lines and connect the dots to who's and who and how. But yeah, eventually the record label, I think, was saying too, we need to call this Yes. From a commercial standpoint, we got to call this Yes. And then Jon Anderson comes back kind of reluctantly.
Well, I don't know how reluctant it was. I'm not sure where Jon Anderson was when he was going back to Yes Man. I'm not sure which albums he had coming out. He was never a person who really set the world on fire in terms of solo sales, besides the Alliance of Sun Hillo. But he always had a vision. And when he went back, to your point, when he went back, when he was went back to Yes, when cinema became Yes, he most of these songs had already been written, completely written. Some had most of them had lead vocals by Trevor Rabin. Some had lead vocals by Chris Squire. So the album was done. And what Anderson did for a few songs was he added a word or two or a phrase, and he got writing credits. And then he added his vocals to most of the songs. Now, there's still a few songs on 90215 where Trevor Rabin, like Changes, for example, where Trevor Rabin sings most of the song, but Anderson's voice is there and he became an integral part of Yes. the other part, and I know we're getting away from drama a little bit, but the other part is that Rabin and Rabin and Trevor Horn weren't really buddies, and Ray and Trevor Horn and Anderson didn't really get along very well. So it made it a little bit more complex. Then you had the added drama, if you will, of Tony Kaye joining the band when most of the keyboard parts were played by Rabin. Then he left the band because he was upset with some things, and he came back. So all that, yes, drama.
Yeah, who knew all of that drama when I was a kid watching Owner of a Lonely Heart, that video on MTV? Who knew all that stuff was going on behind the scenes? So Anderson, he stays with Yes. They made a big generator came after in '87. So
Mhm.
they had a really good run there, commercially speaking, through the rest of the '80s. Then they disband again in the '90s.
It did, yeah. 90215, big generator. And then there was another split. Part of it is because big generator was so difficult to make. It started in, I think, Paris or somewhere in Europe with Trevor Horn getting the basic tracks down. And there was a lot of conflict between Anderson and Horn, and also Horn and Rabin. Then they moved to America. I think they went to LA and a bunch of studios in LA. And Horn was pretty much gone by then, and Trevor Rabin took over most of the production. They were recording and recording and recording. And by the time they hit the road for Big Generator, they were kind of burnt out already. Then after Big Generator, they just said, "Now we just need to take a little break here." And they took a little break. And there was another splinter, and the band reformed. Part of it being Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. Part of it being the old ES, well, actually, it's not true. Part of it was being Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. I think that was kind of going into the talk era. No, that's not even right either, because then we had the Union album
Union
happen.
was 1991.
Right, Union happened, which, despite its title, isn't really a union because it's really two separate bands.
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of the book where I talk, maybe the Kit and Caboodle part, where I talk about some of the Union songs, because those are really songs without Jon Anderson's production input, lyrical input. He may have sang on them, but he wasn't involved in their creation.
Then the album Talk in 1994, barely remember that. That has Jon Anderson on it. Didn't do well. The single The Calling.
Yeah, that was an interesting album too, because they were kind of looking for a new sound, and a new record company, and new management. And they went with, I think it was Victory Records, which didn't have many artists involved with it, but it was a friend of their then manager. And the album was produced by Rabin, mostly written by Rabin and Anderson, with one collaboration with Chris Squire, and also one collaboration with the singer from Supertramp, Roger Hodgson. But the label didn't really promote it because they had no money, and it really died. And the tour for Talk, which featured Billy Sherwood on second guitar, keyboards, and bass, the tour didn't do well either because people didn't know about it.
Yeah, then they had Open Your Eyes. The latter would have been studio album number 18, Magnification. Oh, actually, Jon Anderson's on that one. Okay.
The Andersons, everything till we get back until fly until we get back to Fly From Here.
And that's where we're at now with the book.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot happens in those years between drama and 2011's Fly From Here. Yes, his 20th studio album. This features the first and only appearance of, is it Benoit David?
Benoit David.
Benoit David, yeah, lead vocals.
And one thing I did in the book, Eric, was I talked about Fly From Here, but I did not talk in detail about the return trip. Fly From Here, the return trip. And they're really the same album, but one features Benoit David, the original, and then the other one features Trevor Horn on vocals, replacing Benoit David, where he erased all of Benoit David's vocals. He remixed the album, and he reissued the album. during their, I think it was around their 50th anniversary time. So it's really the same album, but I prefer the original, which had Benoit David. And Benoit David did appear on the EP from a page, but I don't think you can even find Fly From Here, the original, on download. You may be able to find a CD of it, but not on download.
You're right. I don't think that's on streaming services. I think it's the other version.
Yeah, the return trip.
Yes, you're right.
That's a
And
shame.
I think though, if you go onto YouTube, it might be there.
Maybe.
Possibly. So you write, quote, for Yes, the path to Fly From Here was strewn with challenges and moments of quiet revelation. Talk about what led to the album, why Jon Anderson was not involved, and then how do they find Benoit?
Benoit was a singer in a cover band that did Yes covers, and Chris Squire used to consider him a personnel director for Yes. He found keyboardists, he found guitarists, and he saw Benoit David on, I think it was YouTube, and he liked his vocal delivery. There was a situation where they wanted to go out on tour, but Anderson had a very serious medical condition where he could have came close to dying, and they had the tour all lined up. It was supposed to be Anderson, Squire, White, and I believe at the time it was supposed to be Rick Wakeman and Steve Howe. Anderson couldn't do the tour. And they thought, okay, we're going to cancel the tour. Then they thought, well, we have these dates booked. We don't want to really lose all this money and goodwill. So they asked Anderson, is it okay if we hire a singer temporarily to come in and sing the songs while you recover? And he said, okay. And they got Benoit David from, like I said, Chris Squire saw him. Then, as the preparation went on, Rick Wakeman could not do the tour. He had some other obligations, and he recommended, Steve Howe recommended, why don't we use Oliver Wakeman, your son? And Oliver Wakeman is a brilliant keyboardist. In fact, Oliver and Rick Wakeman are going on tour together next year, 2026. A brilliant keyboardist, brilliant composer. He can do the parts. So they said, okay, we'll bring him in and we'll have Benoit David there. So Oliver was expecting to work with Jon Anderson. He came in, started working with Benoit David. They practiced and they got that together. And as the tour went on, it was clear that Jon Anderson could not join the tour. He was not physically able to do that. And then the decision was made by the band. We're just going to continue with Benoit David. And Anderson was a little upset, obviously.
And the seeds of this album, they start with a late night conversation between bassist Chris Squire and Trevor Horn, who produced the album. There's a long dormant demo from the pre-drama days that they bring back.
Yeah, there is. During the drama tour, they did the Fly From Here suite live, but never recorded it in studio. And there are some live recordings of that suite. In fact, there is a box set, a 5-disc box set by Yes, officially by Yes, which features that suite, which features Trevor Horn singing the song "Fly From Your Suite." So they liked that song, and they had written some songs already with Oliver Wakeman, and Oliver Wakeman had also written some songs for the band to contribute to, but they decided, hey, why don't we just go with this Fly From Here suite? We'll expand it, we'll make that into a album, and we'll go from there. And at one point, while in the studio working with the band, because Oliver was still in the band, Oliver Wakeman was still in the band. Um, they decided, or really it was Trevor Horn said, why don't we bring Jeff Downs in? Because Jeff Downs wrote some of these songs, most of these songs. He contributed the original keyboard parts. He knows them. He'll be a good addition. So they asked Oliver Wakeman to step aside, basically fired him.
A nearly 25-minute Odyssey divided into 6 parts, and you say it captured the full spectrum of Yes's musical and emotional journey. How do you feel about Benoit's vocals on that album? Obviously, you write about that version in the book and not the other, so I'm assuming you're a fan.
I'm a fan of Benoit David. I've seen him live, I think 3 times with Yes. He's Canadian, French Canadian, and French is his first language. He speaks English, obviously, but he has an accent. but he really has a good control. He worked his range really well for that on that album. I'm a big fan of his, and I did buy the return trip when they came out during their 50th anniversary celebration, and it's still good, but I can't erase in my mind the original. I just love the original.
While the suite stood as the centerpiece of this album, there are tracks on the album that you say unfold like individual vignettes. Talk about some of the highlights from this. Solitaire is one where Steve Howe's virtuoso guitar skills are on full display. The guy's brilliant. What are some of the other tracks you're a fan of?
I would say probably my favorite song on Fly From Here is Into the Storm. And I think that is the only group composition that the entire group wrote with Oliver Wakeman. It's just a wonderful proggy song. It has a harmony lead vocal. I think it's Chris Squire and Howe and Benoit David. But Into Storm is probably my favorite song. It's a great prog epic. Another standout track is The Man You've Always Wanted Me to Be. And this is a little bit different from what you would expect from Yes, because it really is a soft rock song. It is not doesn't have that many prog elements, but it really has great lyrics, great acoustic and electric guitar, and it also features Chris Squire on lead vocal, not Benoit David. And it's a great vocal by Squire, and the song just really works well.
Preston Frazier, the author of Yes Indeed, Tales from Yes without Jon Anderson. I love that title. So what happened with Benoit? Only one album.
Wow, one and a half albums.
One and a half.
Benoit had some of the same issues that Jon Anderson had. He had I think it was a respiratory infection, and so he was struggling through shows. He during some of the shows he couldn't sing. He had trouble singing. Period. And they thought that they will give him a break and maybe bring someone else in temporarily, like they said with Jon Anderson. And they decided, no, we're not going to continue with him. So they decided just not to continue with Benoit and to seek another singer.
And they brought in Jon Davison.
They brought in Jon Davison, another singer who, he had a background working with other bands as well. He was a big friend, a good friend, maybe his best friend of the drummer from the Foo Fighters. I think it's Taylor Hawkins, and had a really good pedigree, and he could handle the rigors of the road as well as the high vocals that Yes fans expected. Another thing about Yes is they really didn't change the keys to their songs. They haven't done that. A lot of bands, especially bands which have been around for 20, 30, 40 years, change the keys because it's hard for a 70-year-old man to sing songs that he was singing when he was 70.
Oh, yeah.
Hard for a 30-year-old man to sing when the songs were 70. But Yes doesn't do that. So he can handle the rigors of the road and he can write. And Benoit David could write, but wasn't nearly as prolific as Jon Anderson or Jon Davison.
And 3 years later, studio album number 21 for Yes, the first with Jon Davison, is Heaven and Earth.
Heaven and Earth, yes.
The final album to feature Chris Squire, right?
The last Chris Squire album, the first with Jon Davison, and a return of Roy Thomas Baker to production. Well, actually, not a return because he never actually produced a full album. He never did the Paris sessions, just a few songs.
He produced The Cars and, of course, Queen.
And he produced great albums with The Cars and great album with Queen. But he didn't produce a great album with Yes.
Yeah, well, what happened?
Okay. So there is a autobiography by Steve Howe. He talks about Roy Thomas Baker. He seemed very disengaged with the band in terms of giving them feedback. He seemed to focus a lot more on the technology as opposed to the arrangements and songs. And Yes is a band which, from the beginning to today, needs a very strong hand in the studio. Sometimes that was Jon Anderson. Sometimes that is Steve Howe. Sometimes it was Chris Squire. But they didn't have much guidance in the studio. So the arrangements for Heaven and Earth really weren't very well fleshed out. I think the drum sound that Roy Thomas Baker got was pretty awful compared to what he's done with other bands. And also, the keyboard arrangements needed more work. And according to Steve Howe and Jeff Downs, they just didn't have enough time to finish the album properly. They had a tour commitment. They had to get the album, the record company won the album out before the tour, and that's what happened.
And this was his last production credit before he passed away.
Was it really?
I was looking it up. Roy Thomas Baker. Yeah. And for those who may not be aware, we mentioned Chris Squire, the last album before he passed away. He passed away in 2015. But Roy Thomas Baker, if you look at his discography, that's the last one on there. That's it. Heaven and Earth 2014.
Man, that's a shame that he went out on an album, which isn't great. I mean, there are good elements to the album and there's some good songs, but the arrangements are they're boring. The energy is so restrained, and the drums don't jump out the way they did in Drama. So
Yeah, John Davison's vocals, I think he gets better with each album. On this one, though, you do say he arrived not to impersonate, but to extend the spirit. So satisfied with his performance on the album?
yeah, I think he does a great job for his first album with a band of veterans who already have a legacy. Roy Thomas Baker was very focused on John Davison, and he auto-tuned every vocal that John Davis did. And according to Steve Howe in his autobiography, despite the fact that was Davison was perfect, pitch perfect, and never had a problem with his pitch in the studio. But Roy Thomas Baker wanted to process his vocals, and
That's strange.
he sounds well. The whole recording process is strange. Still, the Davison sounds really good. The background vocals are really good, and there's some weirdness around that too because the backing vocals for Heaven and Earth were produced and arranged and mixed by Billy Sherwood. Because by the time they got to the mixing phase of Heaven and Earth, they had had enough of Roy Thomas Baker. Didn't want him to mix it, didn't want him to do the backing vocals. So they brought in Billy Sherwood, who had worked with them on Keys to the Ascension 1 and 2, and also worked with them on Union. And of course, I toured with them for the Talk Tour, and Billy did finish the album out for him.
We mentioned Squire's passing. There was some healing in the process of revisiting some lost pieces. This is for the mini album titled From a Page, released in 2019, 4 previously unreleased tracks from the lineup that was from '08 to 2011. This was some healing not only for the band, but also for fans.
Yeah. I want to go back to Heaven and Earth for a second because there is a rumor that there are unreleased tracks that feature Chris prominently on Heaven that were recorded for Heaven and Earth sessions that we haven't seen, including one epic that Jeff Downs had written. And the song Subway Walls is so well written and played, just poorly produced. For From a Page, you have an energy that you did not have on Heaven and Earth. You have Oliver Wakeman's keyboards front and center. You have some really stinging guitar from Steve Howe. And you have some excellent vocals from Benoit David, who is singing in a slightly lower register than Jon Anderson did or John Davison does. But it worked really well. And you had 4 extremely strong songs, which made for a good half an album. So the question is, why couldn't it continue that and get a full album out of it? But that's the way it goes.
October 1st, 2021, Yes released The Quest, the band's 22nd studio album. John Davison is back on lead vocals. And you write, quote, "The album's title, The Quest, is more than just a name, it's a declaration." So tell us about the newest members of the band here, how you feel the music shows a band that's evolving with every generation.
I think that we're very hesitant to do a new music after Heaven and Earth. Heaven and Earth sold reasonably well, and it had one single, I believe. but the fans, in retrospect, don't particularly love that album. I don't know many people who like the Heaven and Earth. So they were hesitant to go back in the studio and do something unless they were ready to do it. And they wanted a firm hand on production. So they kept it internal. I mean, you have Steve Howe who produced the entire album. You have, of course, you have Alan White there still on drums and Chris Squire on bass. That's right, Alan White still on drums, but you don't have Chris Squire because he unfortunately passed away. And you have Billy Sherwood back in the band. Billy Sherwood was there as a sideman for the Talk Tour and also contributed to Union and was a member for the Ladder album as a guitarist. Here he's back on bass, which I think is his preferred instrument, though he's an excellent guitarist and also an excellent drummer. And they worked on songs individually and collectively. They have two members who live in England, two, I believe, one who live, two who live in the United States, and one who live, no, three who live in the United States. So you had the international piece going where they were flying files back and forth digitally. And it's also during the pandemic they were recording. So there was some challenges there, but they came up with a pretty cohesive album with really strong songs and excellent playing. And I think it's a stark difference between the drumming and the drum sounds of the Quest and Heaven and Earth. Alan White, this sounds so much better on the Quest than he did on Heaven and Earth, even though he was struggling with some physical problems at that point.
And they already started working on what would become the next album, Mirror to the Sky, shortly before the release of the Quest. That album, Mirror to the Sky, was released in May of 2023. They would lose another legendary band member. Alan White died in 2022. We have Jay Shellen on drums. John Davison back for a third time. You write, quote, Mirror to the Sky, the third and finest movement in a trilogy that began with Heaven and Earth, is not a resurrection. It is a culmination, a chrysalis cracked not by nostalgia, but by heat and pressure and a yearning to become more. I do hear the excellence in this album as well. I wonder if it's maybe because Davison, his extended time in the band allowed him to maybe find that strike zone. He's channeling Jon Anderson's spirit here, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, Eric, I think that's an excellent way of putting it. He is finding that strike zone. He's comfortable with his role in the band. He's comfortable as a writer. He's comfortable as a singer, obviously. And he's also comfortable with the other members. I mean, him and Billy Sherwood have worked together a lot over the years in side projects. They have worked together in their side project group. They have worked together in tribute albums. And he also made an effort during the Quest and Mirror of the Sky to physically go over to England and write with Downs and write with Howe and come up with collaborations. So that kind of melded the band together behind the project. One thing that I note about Yes is that there's some albums that they don't like. And when they don't like an album, they don't talk about it or they talk badly about it in the press, which is a little unusual. But the Mirror in the Sky and the Quest, you feel the passion from the band about the project. They all seem to really love it. And the Mirror in the Sky is difficult because one of their long tenured members died before they started the production of the album. So that was a huge loss. But Jay Shellen jumped in. He was on the tours anyway, most of the tours for the prior 3 years before Alan died. So he fit in really well.
Chapter 8 is titled, after a phrase Rick Wakeman once came up with, twiddly bits. What are twiddly bits, and what are some of the best examples of how this applied to Yes's best work?
I was told that term actually came from Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics. I'm going to go with Rick Wakeman.
Okay.
And I heard him during an interview. He was talking about, no, it's actually one of his concerts, one of his solo concerts, when he was talking about a song that he had done for somebody. I don't remember the artist, but the artist said, "Well, we need to fill the song out a little bit. Rick, could you do something?" He said, "Yeah, let's add some twiddly bits here and twiddly bits here. Let's add some little sparkles to the song." And Wakeman was very good at that. And I always loved that song because you can hear that in his playing where he adds these little accents and fills that you may not get from someone like Jeff Downes or Igor Kurashov or I don't know, Patrick Moraz. Yeah, so I like that phrase. And I wanted to include some songs which were not necessarily without John, but really didn't have John. For example, Open Your Eyes, which is one of my favorite Yes albums, features John Anderson on lead vocal. But according to him and Steve Howe, they weren't really involved in the production of the album. That was Billy Sherwood. They weren't involved, even though they get writing credit, they weren't involved with the writing of the album. That was really Chris Squire and Billy Sherwood. So I wanted to include some songs I thought really kind of fit the motif of the book, but may have had John Anderson's vocal.
It's a fun chapter.
I kind of like the songs. And you could talk about, I mean, I could have gone on and talked about some of the songs from 90215, where, yeah, Anderson may have sang lead or sang on them, but he really had very little to do with the songs.
How do these albums without Jon Anderson hold up against the Jon Anderson years? In other words, if you're going to rank every Yes album, do you have some of these above Jon Anderson albums?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's some great Jon Anderson albums. Drama is my favorite Yes album. And that's weird because
Favorite
it's really
period.
period.
Wow.
Yeah. Close to the Edge, Drama's here. Close to the Edge
Wow.
is there. I love Drama. And I think the synth sounds hold up. The guitars are mean. Steve Howe plays his butt off. I love the synth sound. I love the drums. I love the bass parts. It works on all. It's a band album. It works on all cylinders. So I would say, yeah, Drama, and I'll probably say Mirror to the Sky is close to the top um, of my Yes albums. In terms of Jon Anderson Yes albums, you can't go wrong with Close to the Edge. You can't go wrong with Relayer. I like Fragile a lot. I just don't like the solo songs of Fragile as much. And the Yes album is a great album.
They're touring off of Fragile right now.
Yes, I'm going to see them in a few weeks here. Haven't seen them in probably 3 or 4 years, so that'll be good.
Oh, cool. Where are you from?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Atlanta, Georgia. Now, the present state of Yes is fascinating to me. It's not just the present state of Yes, but where they're going to be going from here, because this is an interesting discussion just for all of these bands that came out in the 60s and the 70s. You write in chapter 9, quote, to understand the present state of Yes is to confront a rare story in modern music, one not driven by nostalgia or the mere recitation of past glories, but by an ongoing process of creative survival. Where other bands grew brittle with time, Yes absorbed change and turned it into continuity. The current lineup, Steve Howe on guitar, the legend, the living legend, Jeff Downes on keyboards, Jon Davison on lead vocals, Billy Sherwood on bass, Jay Shellen on drums. Steve Howe, not an original member, but he's been there since 1970, so he's the man. They are about to launch a tour this fall, like I mentioned. We're going to be playing all of the iconic 1971 album Fragile. But you feel that the spirit of this band in the beginning lend perfectly to the idea that they should continue. They can continue no matter who's in the lineup, because that's kind of a Grateful Dead thing. It's the actual essence of the music itself that is really going to carry on through the generations to come, which not every band I think can do, but I think here you have that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, Rick Wakeman was famous for saying something to the effect of, "Yes, can continue, can be like a symphony orchestra when you bring in different players, add their sensibility to the music, but you keep the heritage and the music moving forward." And I think that's true. I mean, there's no new band member in Yes. And Jay Shellen's been around for 5 years, and he's worked with Billy Sherwood for 30 years. Um, Jeff Downes has done, I don't know, 6 or 7 albums with Yes so far. Then you have Jon Davison, who's been lead vocalist on 3 albums, not counting the live albums he sang on, and Steve Howe's been there for 50 some years. So they earned the right to do this music, and they're still moving the bar forward in terms of doing good new music while honoring the past. So you have those fans who say, I only want to see these certain people, but that's just not going to happen. We're lucky to have this music continue to move forward. And the prospect in 2026 of having new music is really thrilling, quite frankly.
Is Steve Howe the guy who makes all the decisions, business decisions, or the future of the band? Like, I hate that. I hope it's not anytime soon. But when he's gone, what happens? Who makes those calls?
I don't know. I don't think Steve Howe is solely in charge of that. I think it's a collaboration. But clearly, with Alan White gone now and Chris Squire gone, Steve Howe has tremendous influence. He's produced the last two albums. I don't know if he's producing the new album. My guess is he's probably producing it. But I mean, the power dynamics in Yes has changed over the years anyway. When you had how you had, well, really Anderson and Squire being the focus, then Anderson and Howe, then Anderson, then Rabin, then Howe, then it shifts back and forth. So who knows?
A lot of changing parts. But it'd be nice to see Jon Anderson maybe come back for at least a song or two. Yeah.
No.
No, no, you don't see it happening.
I've seen Anderson live two times, and it was enjoyable both times. And he has a great career. His album with the Band Geeks was fantastic, and he's been working on, I can't remember the name of the last album he did with a full band, but he's been working on a part two of that album, wherever that was. Um, he mended fences with Squire before Squire died, and Howard and him talk. So is that possible that he will ever appear on stage with them? It's possible. Neither one of them, neither camp discounts that. But in terms of continuing to move the music forward with new albums, they're very happy with John Davison, and they want to continue with that as long as they can. And you're right. Hal is what? He's 78. I think he's older.
Yeah.
So they won't go on forever with him, but they may go on forever.
But they may go on forever, which is the point is, yeah, that it's the music itself that's going to outlive those who have been in it in the past and who are in it right now. Yes, indeed. Tales from Yes without Jon Anderson. It's out now, and you could find it wherever books are sold. You said look for it at your nearest bookstore very soon. And
Yep.
Yeah, independent bookstores, look for it there. You can go to bookedonrock.com to find your nearest independent bookstore. And people can find you online, Preston, where?
I am at slangofages.com, slangofages.com. That's also the title of my podcast where I talk about my favorite albums and interview artists. So it's there. Of course, I'm on Instagram under Slang of Ages Podcast and Facebook and X.
Cool. Preston Frazier, thanks so much for coming back on. Look forward to having you back on again in the future.
Good to talk to you, Eric. Always a pleasure. Take care.